Alright, y'all, what is going on? This is your man L Jamal coming through with another edition of Upon Further Review. And this time I'll be getting into one of my favorite movies of all time, that being the original Nightmare on Elm Street, dropping in 1984, starring Robert Englund as well as Heather Langenkamp. I'll be getting into the plot and, of course, why this movie resonates so much with me, why it's, one of my favorites of all time and one of the best of its genre. So if you like what you guys saw today, please be sure to like, subscribe, leave comments, all that good stuff. I'll be leaving a link to my Instagram in the description of the video. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
Who's this guy? He had nice fingers.
Fred Krueger, Mom. Fred Krueger. Lay me down to sleep.
So things start off with Freddy actually constructing the glove, and I always appreciated this scene, especially, well, even as a kid, because it shows a different layer, I guess, or like, some type of background, of how he became, who he was, instead of just showing up and just killing people, with a certain weapon, whether that be a machete or a chainsaw or whatever, but he actually, takes the time, and creates this work of diabolical art, right? So anyways, we move on, and he starts harassing this girl named Tina in her dream. Now this seems like a regular dream, with a, or nightmare equipped with, your essential jump scare, but we are left with something that, automatically makes us know we are in for a different situation.
Fingernails, you gotta stop that kind of dreaming. One or the other.
Now, the next day at school, Tina will go talk to her best friends Nancy and Glenn about what had happened to her. Now, they wouldn't get into any details, but they would admit to having some nightmares recently as well. Now, later on that night, she would be by herself because her mom was out of town, and she would invite them over for some emotional support, and Rod would eventually come over too. And this is where Nancy and her would have discussions about their dreams and pretty much confirm that they were talking about the same guy, which, of course, starts to get spooky for them. Of course, Glenn would dismiss this all as just talk, but again, the seeds are already being sown.
Or more like finger knives or something he made himself. They made a horrible sound. Nancy, you dreamed about the same creep I did.
Now later on in the night, right before they would fall asleep, Rod would reveal to Tina that he had been having some nightmares as well. Now she would try to press him for some answers. He wouldn't give her any, but he would try to explain to her that since they've, made up in a way that, they should both be able to get a good night's sleep, right? Well, unfortunately, he was wrong. Of course, Freddy would enter Tina's dream, and just the way he, broke everything down, or, how this all played out, it was really deep and intense, right? So it starts off with, him tapping out the window with that rock, right? Where we hear him, throwing that rock there, right? Breaks through the window. So she comes all outside. Again, it's a dream, but again, why would you do all that? I don't know. You can't control yourself, I guess. So she makes her way outside, and the whole time, it's just unnerving because you just hear him calling out her name. Like he knows her. He ain't never really met her in his life, but he knows her name. He goes, Tina. That just was freaking me the fuck out as a kid, right? So he's making his way down, and you finally see him, pop up. And mind you, it was later on, that I saw this movie, not as a small child, but like as a preteen, right when you get out of that stage when you get scared from shit. But still, the first reveal of him, because all I know of, I just seen pictures of him before. I've seen posters of it, like little commercials, but I ain't never really seen a movie. So to see him walking up out of nowhere, with those long ass arms, you was like, nah, bro, I know you already had a knife for a hand, but I didn't even know you could do all this extra shit with your body. That had me all the way fucked up. So I'm sitting there, oh shit. So of course he's chasing her down, trying to get down. She's running for her life, and the cool part is right before, the action happens, right? She gets right to the door, and she thought she's about to get in the house. But then, they're wrestling and tussling, right? And she's trying to push his face away on some Nicolas Cage shit. John Travolta, the face came off, and she just, oh, it just was crazy because you know, you wasn't expecting that either. So I'm sitting there watching it, and then finally, you know, unfortunately, you know, the the bloodletting happens, right? So you just start seeing cuts and blood, and then she's thrown into the ceiling. And the whole time you see nothing there, and you're like, "Oh shit, this is crazy!" And he's being flung across the room. She bumps into Rod. Rod don't know what the hell going on, and then she's screaming, he's screaming, and then she just falls, right? Blood splatters on Rod, and then the first thing that I thought of was, damn, man, he about to go to jail for some shit. Cause I already know the trope of the husband or the boyfriend, the messed up relationship, he might snap. Now, that doesn't just show up in movies. I mean, that does happen in real life too, right? So you already kind of knew where it was going, despite knowing it was Freddy. And just seeing that right there even fucked me up. I felt some type of way for Rod because it's just like, damn, he's gonna go down for this. Now, she being Nancy, she tries to process this. She's at the police station. Mind you, the head police in the town, at least in that neighborhood, is her dad. So this complicates everything, right, in a way. She tries to go to school the next day. Rod approaches her or tries to approach her and tries to explain. It don't work. Of course, he ends up getting arrested. And, it's just already just drama like she wasn't even expecting. And I think this, the first death scene and just how it took a turn, that was one of the indicative signs for me that this is one of the, something different than I've ever seen in a horror movie before. While Nancy's in school, she falls asleep in one of her classes and she starts to have another nightmare. This time, Freddy is pretty much messing with her. He first, he pops up, well, Tina's body pops up in a body bag, and it kind of lures her outside where she bumps into a hall monitor, right? That hall monitor ends up being Freddy, but long story short, she makes her way down to the boiler room, and again, Freddy reveals himself finally, in the flesh, face to face, and, he flashes, Nancy, and he begins to cut himself. He has to make it all dramatic. He has to make interest. Again, this is part of the personality. This is what makes him different than most. I think him and your boy, Hellraiser, I forget what his name is, but those two motherfuckers got the most personality out of all the horror movie villains, and it makes them the I say chef's kiss grade A villains because of their personality alone. Y'all just don't feel me though. But Freddy, of course, has to make his appearance known. And again, he starts chasing, your girl, around the boiler room. And he has her cornered. He thinks he's going to get her. And he has to make it all fucking weird. Come to Freddy. You know what he's doing. He's fucking with people. And he about to get her, but then she decides to burn her arm on a pipe. She wakes up. Of course, she spazzes out in class. She decides, I got to go. Okay, she goes home, but on the way home, she realizes that burn that she took in the dream is legit there. So she's freaking the fuck out because she realized, oh man, this is real. I could die in this dream, I think. Yeah, like Tina. So she goes home. She decides to take a bath, or she falls asleep again. Yeah, I'm telling you. And here comes Freddy, tries to drown her. And this is the cold part because, people do die when they fall asleep in tubs and hot jacuzzis and shit. So that could have been just a typical death that they could have wrote off. They didn't have to worry about no Freddy. Or, they wouldn't have said nothing. That's some cold shit. But again, the mama comes, saves her, and this is some cold ass shit because now she's on caffeine pills. She ain't getting no sleep. And again, this is why this movie makes another connection with me because, again, like I told you about my dreams or my nightmares real briefly. Now, I would stay up all night as a kid sometimes if I was really fucked up. I couldn't even sleep either. I didn't even need no caffeine shit, no coffee, no nothing. My mind just kept me up, so I'd just be sitting there, not even sleeping till like 3, 4 in the morning. Damn near the sun come up. So I know how she feel. It fucks up your whole sleep pattern. You falling asleep just like her in class. Oh, it's all bad. Anyway, she decides to have Glenn come over, help her out a little bit with these nightmares, see if he can spot Freddy too, or maybe pull him out. She sees him at the jail trying to mess with Rod. That's the next victim. Again, she tries to do something, but she couldn't. Freddy spots her, disappears, right? But, again, she has another confrontation with Freddy, and she wakes up. She gets mad at Rod because Rod wasn't there. You know how she gonna do, blame it all on him. But again, people sleeping, they supposed to be asleep. It is what it is. Sorry, love. But anyways, Freddy makes his way back to the jail. He does get Rod hung up, and it's a little bit sad because, again, ain't nothing nobody can do about it because it kind of looks like a suicide. She tried to get her dad, warn her dad, but it just didn't work. Now, after the funeral, she does go to Rod's funeral. She does go to a sleep clinic where they study dreams and all that. And this is some sick shit because in this dream, she actually pulls out some evidence from Krueger now. She pulls out a hat. And this is where everything kind of changes. But the cold part is the grown folks are still in denial. And my problem is at this point, she brings out a fucking hat. Goddamn well she didn't bring it with her. So what the fuck are y'all still tripping about? It says Fred Krueger. Y'all figure it out. That's what made me very frustrated. But all right, so eventually Marge, Nancy's mom, would, actually spill the beans on Freddy, right? Now, she told her that, he was, in the community, unaliving the children. And at some point, it had reached up to 20 kids. Now, he had been arrested, but he was released on some type of technicality. And this is when the adults, the parents of the community, decided to step up and take some action. Were they justified? Hey, it is what it is. It just seems, however, though, that Marge hasn't been able to sit well with it. And it's been bothering her. It's been eating at her. And I think this might have been the key to, Freddy, reappearing in this way, especially when we find out that she's been, holding on to his glove this entire time. Now, this is how I feel. Evil spirits like, Freddy, they just don't go away. They stay stuck on this plane to some extent, so they remain here to haunt people. They don't move on, and matter, even spiritual matter, doesn't really change. It doesn't really get destroyed. It just changes. So in the flesh, Freddy, for what it's worth, was a murderer in the flesh who targeted children. Now in his spirit, he's embodied, by these burns, but he still kind of goes at it the same way, although now he's targeting, teenagers in their dreams in a different realm, a non-physical realm, right? And I just feel, then this is something that I've kind of thought about on my most recent watch of this movie. Although, yes, fear keeps him alive, I felt as though Nancy's mom's, her fear is what kept him alive, at least to this point. And the fear that Tina and eventually Nancy would express, would kind of bring him all the way out of, at least into these children's dreams or these kids' dreams. I think that's kind of what happens. And again, it's just so weird to me, but it kind of makes sense in a way. Actually, no, none of it makes sense from Marge's standpoint. I don't understand why she would hold on to the glove in the first place. I think it made Nancy a target without her even knowing it. And I think that's the power of, people letting things go. And, Marge, despite, at the time feeling justified, and many of the other parents, including, obviously, Nancy's dad, who's no longer in the situation, at least in the house, they all felt that they were justified. However, there seems to be some type of regret on her end. And like I said, I feel like that's what kind of kept at least the spirit of Freddy around until the kids were actually able to, manifest, or at least able to see him and generate their own fear as well. Again, making him this all powerful thing in their lives at the moment. And so it's really weird, and, it just, again, speaks to letting things go. At some point, for Marge, for what it's worth, I mean, she just never spoke out on it, I guess. And she used alcoholism to kind of cope with that. We see that near the end. I don't want to get too far into that right now. But again, that's what we're dealing with. Now, one night, Glenn unfortunately does get caught up in his sleep, leaving Nancy to fend for herself. Now, we have seen her doing her researching on survival methods, booby traps, so she's looking to execute some plan now. She's had enough of Freddy, and she will execute this plan and to bring him out into, the real world where she can at least get the authorities to do something, or at least get people to think that she's not crazy. And she works on that. Now, the same night as Glenn's death, her father comes over to investigate that situation, and she has him come over. Well, she promised him, or has him promised to come over in about 20 minutes. She thinks that's just enough time to kind of fall asleep, get Freddy out of that dream world, and to see if she can save her situation. Now, again, the alarm does go off. Originally, she doesn't see him. She thinks that she's failed, but out of nowhere he pops up. And this is when we start to get closer to that, that climax. Now, Freddy chases her all the way down the house, but this is where the traps are set up. There's a good moment where he's hit with a sledgehammer. He falls down the stairs. He gets tripped down the stairs. So, he's taking certain damages, and then she corners him in the basement. Nancy douses him with, gasoline, sets him afire. Now, this is the cold part, though. That's not really his weakness, y'all. It's really not. Now, Krueger doesn't go down easy. He makes his way upstairs to Marge, and he smothers her with these embers. And Dawn will come into the room, put out the fire, but we see her charred body making its way to the underworld yet again. Freddy has struck again. Now, albeit Nancy was able to pull him out of the dream world, but he had to make one last, gotcha moment. Now, at this point, Don and Nancy embrace, and he leaves her, in this room by herself. Why? I don't know. But the door closes, and she has one last encounter with Freddy. And in this point in time, she's, garnered up all her strength and her courage, and she's turned her back on Freddy. And in my opinion, she solidifies herself. If we take away the ending, which I'll get to in just a second. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, if we take away the ending, this is one of the strongest performances by a final girl. She actually stands up to her, her, you want to say her hunter, or the person that was pursuing her, and she destroys him. She basically tells him he ain't shit. Now, this is where we get into, at least my problems, this ending here, despite me loving this movie so much. So after her final confrontation with Freddy, Nancy opens the door to her room, and what do you know? She's on the front porch. It's a nice sunny day outside. Her mom comes outside. She's chirping about wanting to be sober and all this good stuff. Then here pulls up Glenn. He's with Tina and Rod, and they all get in the car and they're laughing and joking. Then the top comes down. They don't notice this, but the viewer is seeing this. It's Freddy's color, so we're all like, oh shit, right? And everybody's laughing and giggling. Then the car starts to lock up on them, and everybody's screaming, "What's going on? What's going on?" So the car drives off, and we see Freddy's glove pulls, Mom inside the house, and that's your last little jump scare. And you see the girls on the jump rope. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, right? Here's what I don't get. So there's so many questions that I have. Are we in the real world? Were we in a dream world? Did Nancy really not wake up in that final scene? Was she still dreaming? Was what we just saw, was that her dream? You see what happens when you want to just put in a random ending in something just for the sake of, let's get a sequel, let's do this, let's get a jump scare. The ending was so weird. First of all, too many questions, for one. And also, it undoes the line of thinking of, you standing up to your fears, and that's pretty much it. In reality, Nancy stood up to the fear, and at that point, there's nothing that Freddy really could have done to her. Now, if you really want to subvert, let me say this. I understand what they were trying to do. Okay, you wanted to subvert, that expectation. Oh, she stood up to her fear, so that should have done Freddy in. Right. wrong, I'm back, really. Really, in order for that to really hit, and this is, again, upon watching it again as I get older, I think what would have really worked if he would have just said fuck and just killed her right there in the room. Oh, your back is turned. So what? Oh, that was gonna work on me. You thought that was gonna work on me? Maybe you bring up Glenn. Oh, you were listening to Glenn, weren't you? Something like that. He could have said something like that and still killed her right then and there. The final kill, the final sequence was really passive aggressive, a little bit unnecessary. He basically killed everybody twice. Like, because in reality, I know what people are going to say. Well, they just got in the car. We don't know if they died. Why would he let them go? So it's safe to say that he killed them. And for Nancy's sake, she got killed twice because she shows up in the third movie, excuse me. So it's just like it was redundant. And I feel like the only way you could have really made it work, like I said, is if you let her go. She stood up to, because in reality, we saw how ineffective he was. He completely went away. So in reality, she won. It's almost like it was a cheap trick. Like, oh, here we go. We really, she really didn't win. It was a roundabout way of doing it. Like I said, you could have just had her sliced up right there and called it a day. Or like I said, have her take her victory, walk on off in the sunset, or, back, whatever, and it fades to black. Particularly if you're gonna bring her back in the third movie anyways, and kill her then. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to kill all these people twice just for the sake of the sequels. When in the sequels, Freddy's, MO is a little bit different in each one. He's going after different people, in each one. Like in the second one, he goes after this guy. And then in the third movie, he goes after these other people. And yeah, Nancy does show up, but in each movie, it seems like it's a different, like almost like an anthology series. Like, it doesn't go chronologically. Well, maybe it might go chronologically together. I don't know. But it seems to me, well, it's definitely not the same character in every movie that he's focusing on. So, with that being said, you could have let her go. You could have had her killed right there. But to go all round about it and kill her anyway, it just really just left a lot of questions for me, even as a kid. I almost felt let down, even though I was scared watching everything at the same time. I'm like, well, why didn't he just kill her then? Or whatever, why couldn't she just gotten away? So it was just really weird, a really weird ending. But with that being said, everything else about this movie worked pretty well. And I'm going to break some of that down and, some of the insides of this movie that I really felt, stood out to me. All right. Now, why would a movie like this resonate so deeply with me? Why would I basically call it therapy for nightmares, at least for me in my situation? Well, as a kid, I mentioned I suffered through night terrors almost nightly in certain periods of my, life. But the ironic thing is that it wasn't always necessarily triggered by a scary movie or a monster, scary story, stuff like that. Sometimes, depending on how good it was or the storyteller, yeah, whatever. But what I came to, learn as I got older, actually, a full-fledged adult, was a lot of my nightmares, and it makes sense, were being triggered by, the events and some of the traumas of my early childhood. I don't want to get into all that here. We ain't got to talk all about that now, but subconsciously I was holding a lot of those fears in, and it would bother me, and I didn't know that at first, because in reality, in these dreams, I never really dreamed about monsters. I wasn't dreaming about, bad guys per se, or a movie I had just watched. A lot of these dreams were really real for me. But with that being said, I figured that, movies like Nightmare on Elm Street, horror movies, you know what I'm saying, conquering that fear and being able to withstand that fear and those abstract fears, I thought in theory would help me overall. That was my belief. Like I mentioned, I would, despite, being a little bit skittish as a child, I would seek these movies out even back then, just to kind of get over those fears, to understand that it wasn't real. So having a situation in which, somebody's, has, these nightmares, a character like Nancy, and seeing her physical, the physical toll the lack of sleep took on her, I was feeling that story. I went through those same things. I suffered, headaches and migraines throughout my childhood because of lack of sleep. My patterns were way off. I would fall asleep in class because I was not sleeping at night in a lot of cases. And this was something I couldn't talk about for a long time because, you figured nobody wants to hear about that, particularly coming from a boy, and being a black boy. Oh man, shit. Whew. Let's not even get into all that. So it was, when I first saw this movie, it came at a point in my life where I was at this crossroads. Like, you know what? I'm tired of nightmares. I'm tired of whatever. I'm tired of things spooking me, particularly things that I know, that shouldn't, or just like I said, those nightmares in general. I wanted them to go away. So I wouldn't say inundate is the right word, but I would consume this media. I would watch this, and sometimes I would watch it with the lights on, the lights off. To kind of get a different effect, just so I can understand this ain't real. You can walk away from this, and eventually, again, this is just for my personal experience. It might not work for everybody, but eventually, those bad dreams and those fears did kind of go away. Now, again, you get older, you're not necessarily afraid of the dark, but you do get anxiety, you do get, decision wariness and things like that. You have to deal with the real world too. That doesn't necessarily go away, but learning how to manage it, was a big part of that battle. Even now when I face anxiety, I know what I got to do. I know what I have to do to face it. Back then I didn't even know how to even address it or even admit that I was having these fears. So to be in a point now where I can face them and handle them and continue my life, because like I mentioned, there was a lot of things that I faced in my childhood that was negative. But I don't even really want to get into it now because I've moved so far along and so far beyond that. And I have an opportunity to be far and away from whatever I had to go through. And I've, forgiven all those times, and I've looked back at those times, and I've, let go of the negativity. And, long story short, the horror genre, at least in my own personal mind and those fears that I had, it helped let a lot of that go. Having a connection with a character like Nancy, and don't get me wrong, I don't mean this as hyperbole, but, Wes Craven knew how to empower, a lot of his characters, particularly the women, in his movies. And in my opinion, Nancy is probably one of the greatest final girls next to, Sidney Prescott. Very rarely in horror movies do you see, and I know I mentioned this before, I know I've talked about this when I talked about this movie before, but very rarely do you see somebody go out of their way to actually challenge what's in front of them. They actually make a plan, devise a plan, and they say, you know what, I'm facing that. A lot of times, the final boy or the final girl just happens to survive. They were being chased and being hounded. Sometimes the final boy might fight back a little bit, but for the most part, you see a lot of running and screaming and hollering. Even in one of my favorite horror movies outside of this series, Texas Chainsaw, the girl screams throughout the whole movie. Nancy gathers herself together and she devises a plan to not only bring Freddy out in the open, but to ultimately beat him. Again, I look at the Scream franchise. Every single flick, Sidney is going out of her way to face that attacker and fight back. And very rarely do I see it done well. And Nancy, she devises a plan, does all that she can. That's why the ending doesn't really work for me, because she brought him out into the real world. That's it for dude. Now I get it, y'all want to make, sequels and all that and money, whatever, but for Nancy, she won that battle. Point blank period, because that's how you knock out fear. You face it, you man up, woman up, and you conquer it right face on, and it doesn't bother you no more. You cannot. That's why the whole point of him coming back, it creates so many questions, because in reality, when you're not afraid of something, that's it. Like, there's nothing else there. But long story short, even as I look at it now as an adult, I love the concept of eventually facing your fears. You cannot back down. She was against the wall and she fought back mentally, spiritually. That's what you do, because sometimes it ain't physical, right? Sometimes it is in your head. Sometimes your outlook on something is what's keeping you bogged down. Your fear, your inability to want to do it, or your fear of failure, which, hey, you're talking to the poster boy of that, buddy. sometimes you have to learn to let go and face that fear and again, move on. Alright, y'all, if you like what you saw today, please be sure to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I have more content coming. You know, like I said, times have been kind of crazy with my schedule. I got work full time. I got school. I'm back in school again. A 33-year-old motherfucker in school. That's what it is. But that's how we doing it. All right, y'all. If you like what you saw, like I said, please like, subscribe, leave comments, suggestions, all that good stuff. And if anybody's told you yet I love you, peace out, one love. I'll holler at you guys later.